The ancient world holds many mysteries, rituals with no clear meaning, languages that remain unreadable, and everyday moments lost to time. But sometimes, what survives isn't a grand monument or city. It's a single curious detail, a forgotten invention, or a custom that no longer makes sense. Tonight, we're uncovering some of those remnants, real pieces of ancient history. Some are famous, many are overlooked. Facts that don't always make it into textbooks but quietly shape how we see the past. So whether you're tuning in while working, winding down after a long day, or just seeking something calm to accompany you, we're glad you're here. There's no need to catch every detail, just let the facts and stories come as they will. As always with our videos, the visuals are there just for context. You don't have to watch to enjoy the journey. Grab a snack, get comfortable, and let the noise of the outside world fade for a bit. Let's begin. What if I told you that writing, the foundation of civilization, literature, and everything we know, might have started because of beer? Not poetry, philosophy, or religion, but beer. Over 5,000 years ago, the ancient Sumerians in what is now southern Iraq were the first people to create written language. While this might sound grand and ceremonial, the truth is a bit more grounded. The earliest examples of their writing, known as cuneiform, weren't epic tales or spiritual texts. They were simple lists, receipts, and inventory ledgers scratched into wet clay with a reed stylus. And what were they keeping track of? Beer, rations. Picture this. A worker on a temple project receiving their daily allotment of barley-based drink. A scribe carefully noting it on a tablet. 1 jar for this person, 2 for that. Beer wasn't just a beverage to the Sumerians. It was part of their economy. A standard payment, a daily necessity, safer than water and packed with calories. It was both food and currency. And when things got complex, when there were hundreds of workers with different roles and varying amounts owed, they needed a way to manage it all. And that's when writing was born. Cuneiform began as pictographs, little drawings of jars, grains, and numbers. Over time, these symbols became more abstract, evolving into wedge-shaped impressions pressed into clay. Simple at first, but eventually, capable of recording everything from trade agreements to mythology. But behind this sophistication, it all began with something surprisingly ordinary: logistics. The need to track who got what, when, and how much. That doesn't make it less impressive. It makes it more human. It reminds us that some of the greatest inventions come not from grand visions, but from the practical needs of everyday life. From the desire to stay organized, to keep records, and ensure everyone got their fair share. Even the famous Epic of Gilgamesh, the earliest surviving piece of literature, came later. The origins of writing were more like the ancient equivalent of spreadsheets and pay stubs, except, instead of Excel files, they were slabs of clay. And beer wasn't just the reason for writing. It was woven deeply into Sumerian culture. They even had a goddess of brewing, Ninkasi. One of the oldest known hymns in history isn't a battle song or prayer, it's a recipe for beer. So the next time you write something down, whether it's a to-do list or a novel, just remember, it all started with barley, clay, and the need to track who got their pint. Here's a strange and surprisingly practical fact from ancient Egypt. The oldest known prosthetic limb in the world isn't a leg or an arm, it's a wooden toe, found near Luxor and dating back over 3,000 years. This toe belonged to a woman and was crafted with remarkable care out of wood and leather. At first glance, it might seem like an odd thing to preserve over the centuries, but what makes this tiny artifact fascinating isn't just its age, it's how well it was made. The construction wasn't symbolic or ceremonial. It wasn't designed to look nice in the afterlife or serve as decoration. The wear marks on the underside show it was actually used, worn during life, walked on, and repaired like any well-used item. It was likely crafted to help its wearer walk more comfortably, especially in sandals, which were common at the time. And that's what's interesting. This wasn't some elaborate, high-tech invention. It was a simple piece of functional design, a practical solution to a real-world problem, and it worked. This shows us that even thousands of years ago, people were thinking creatively about how to improve quality of life through ingenuity. The ancient Egyptians were renowned for their architectural feats and medical advancements, including surgical tools, dental care, and early forms of antibiotics. But this wooden toe adds a more personal touch to the picture. It reminds us that history isn't only about grand monuments and powerful rulers. Sometimes, it's about a single individual trying to make life just a little easier. While this prosthetic is the oldest known, it isn't the only one from the ancient world. In ancient Rome, we begin to see bronze and iron prosthetics, especially among soldiers who had lost limbs in battle. There's even the famous Capua leg, a bronze and iron prosthetic dating back to around 300 BCE, likely created for a Roman soldier who lost his leg in combat. In medieval Europe, crude yet clever wooden prosthetic hands and hooks appeared, but none of these precede the quiet little wooden toe from Egypt. It's a small object, yet it carries a big idea: the drive to adapt, to fix something broken, and to make life just a bit easier, even with the limited tools available at the time. That kind of innovation is timeless. Here's something you might not expect from the ancient world: vending machines. Not the kind that gives you a cold drink or a bag of chips, but the concept is surprisingly similar. In the 1st century CE, a Greek engineer named Philo of Byzantium created a device that would feel right at home in a temple's version of a convenience store. His machine was designed to dispense holy water automatically. When a coin was inserted, the machine's clever system of levers and weights would open a valve, releasing a measured amount of water. Once the coin tipped the balance, the valve would shut, with no need for priests, no measuring, and no hassle. Just pay, pour, and go. Though it might sound like a novelty, these machines weren't just one-off gimmicks. They were used in Egyptian temples where people came to perform rituals or make offerings. The vending machine helped regulate access to sacred water, ensuring no one took too much, and probably impressed a few visitors along the way. It was automation with a spiritual twist. Philo wasn't some basement tinkerer. He was a legitimate inventor and scientist, part of a tradition of Greek engineers who weren't afraid to experiment. His other creations included mechanical birds, water pumps, and early ideas about steam power. Some of his concepts even laid the groundwork for later thinkers in the Islamic Golden Age and the Renaissance. But this little machine stands out because it's so relatable. Thousands of years later, we're still enamored with the same concept: put in a coin, get something useful or satisfying in return. It's amusing to think that today, we stand in line at vending machines, wondering if our snack will get stuck. While centuries ago, people were doing the same thing, but with sacred water and perhaps a little divine forgiveness. The core idea has endured, and it's a small reminder that human ingenuity and the desire for convenience have been around much longer than we often realize. If you think the idea of a massive, well-organized library is a modern concept, here's something surprising. Over 2,600 years ago, the ancient Assyrians were already doing it, and on a grand scale. The library of Ashurbanipal, built in the 7th century BCE in the city of Nineveh, modern-day Iraq, wasn't just a collection of scrolls or scattered tablets. It contained over 30,000 clay tablets, carefully cataloged and stored. That's not just impressive for the time. It's staggering. These weren't just government records. The library held epic poems, legal documents, religious texts, medical instructions, astronomical charts, and even letters and administrative memos. Ashurbanipal, the Assyrian king who founded the library, wasn't just a conqueror. He was a scholar, deeply interested in preserving knowledge. He didn't leave it to chance. He ordered scribes to collect texts from across Mesopotamia and beyond, even sending officials to foreign cities to copy important works. Think of it as one of the earliest major efforts at cultural preservation. The most famous piece in the library is the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest known pieces of literature in the world. This epic was found among the tablets, written in cuneiform, the wedge-shaped script of the time. What's even more fascinating is that these tablets were fired in kilns or hardened by fire during the destruction of the library. What's even more fascinating is that these tablets were fired in kilns or hardened by fire during the destruction of Nineveh, which ironically helped preserve them. If the city hadn't been burned during its fall, much of the collection might not have survived at all. But because of that chaos, we now have insight into what people were reading, studying, and passing down over 2 millennia ago. The library even had its own version of an early Dewey Decimal System. Some tablets had marks or labels to help organize them, and get this, some were even marked with warnings not to remove them. So yes, overdue tablet policies might be older than we thought. Ashurbanipal's library was the product of empire and ambition, but at its core it was also about memory, about trying to preserve knowledge in a world where so much could be lost to war, fire, or time. Today, many of those tablets are housed in museums and are still being studied by scholars who translate them line by line. Every so often, one reveals something new, a forgotten name, a remedy for an ancient illness, or a myth once told by firelight. All of this comes from a king who wanted his people, and maybe even the future, to remember what they knew. Let's head to Japan for something a bit unexpected. Massive, ancient burial mounds shaped like keyholes. These are known as kofun, and they date back to the 3rd to 7th century CE during the Kofun period. But these weren't ordinary graves. They were elite tombs for emperors, nobles, and powerful clan leaders. Some of them are absolutely massive, stretching over 400 meters long. From the sky, they resemble old keyholes, a circular mound at one end connected to a rectangular platform. Inside these tombs were treasures, bronze mirrors, weapons, armor, ornaments, and most intriguingly, Haniwa clay figures placed around the tomb, shaped like animals, warriors, dancers, and even houses. We don't know exactly what the Haniwa were for, maybe guardians, maybe ceremonial objects, but they show a deeply symbolic approach to death and remembrance. These tombs weren't just burial sites. They were statements. The size of the kofun often reflected the power of the person inside, and constructing one required thousands of workers and meticulous planning. This era marked a shift in early Japanese society from smaller clans to a more centralized power structure. Even today, some of these sites remain untouched. The largest, the Daisen Kofun in Osaka, is believed to be the tomb of Emperor Nintoku, and it's so massive it rivals the Egyptian pyramids in scale. But here's the twist. Because it's classified as an imperial tomb, it's largely off-limits to archaeologists. That means much of what we know about the Kofun period comes from the edges, from smaller tombs and scattered artifacts. It's like trying to piece together a history book with half the pages missing. Yet, what's left still tells us a lot. It reveals a time when leaders sought to leave their mark on the land, not through writing or monuments, but through enormous, carefully designed tombs that continue to shape the landscape today. Modern. Concrete doesn't always live up to its promises. Roads crack after just a few seasons, seawalls crumble, and bridges need constant upkeep. Even brand new buildings start showing signs of wear too quickly. But Roman concrete? It's held up for over 2,000 years, particularly in the places where you'd expect it to fail first. Seawater. All across the ancient Mediterranean, Roman structures still stand in the surf, with waves crashing against them every day. Harbors, breakwaters, piers, they're weathered, yes, but still intact. So how did they do it? The answer lies in their unique recipe. Roman engineers used a blend of volcanic ash, lime, and seawater to create a type of self-healing concrete. The volcanic ash wasn't just a filler, it triggered a chemical reaction when exposed to salt water, forming new minerals inside the concrete over time. One of these minerals, called aluminous tobermarite, acts like nature's glue. Instead of deteriorating, the concrete actually grew stronger the longer it sat in water. Roman marine concrete didn't just last, it evolved. What's even more impressive is that they likely figured this out through trial and observation, not by fully understanding the chemistry. The ash came from areas like Mount Vesuvius and the Bay of Naples, regions with a lot of geological activity and experimentation in early construction. The Romans saw what lasted and leaned into it, using this material in some of the most critical infrastructure of their empire: ports, aqueducts, baths, and buildings meant to stand for generations. And in many cases, they did. Modern scientists have spent years trying to reverse engineer this ancient mix to improve our own materials, especially for marine construction. Some researchers even argue that Roman concrete could help us build better structures on the moon or Mars, where traditional cement won't work. It's one of those rare instances where ancient technology might actually leap ahead of our own. So, next time you walk past a crumbling sidewalk or a pothole that keeps coming back, remember, there's a recipe from 2,000 years ago that might still be better than the one we're using today. All it took was a little ash, a lot of patience, and a civilization that knew how to build things to last. Here's something you probably didn't learn in school about the Great Pyramid of Giza. It once had a door. Not just any door, though. Here's the rewritten version of that part, keeping the calm, immersive tone and smooth flow. Did you know the Great Pyramid of Giza once had a door? Not just any door. A massive stone slab so precisely balanced it could be gently pushed open from the inside. Imagine that. A multi-ton limestone block, cut and fitted with such skill that a single person inside could nudge it open. No hinges, no pulleys, no handles visible from the outside. The door blended perfectly into the pyramid's outer casing stones, making it nearly invisible. Early explorers reportedly walked right past it without ever noticing. This wasn't a one-off trick, either. The second pyramid at Giza, built for Khafra, had a similar secret door. So how did ancient Egyptians pull off such a mechanical marvel over 4,000 years ago using only copper and stone tools? Theories say the door pivoted on sockets carved into the floor and ceiling, allowing it to rotate vertically like a hidden trapdoor. It's the kind of precise, clever engineering we rarely associate with that era. But maybe we should. The Great Pyramid wasn't just a monument. It was a masterpiece of design. Every block placed with intent, the internal chambers, ventilation shafts, and passageways all part of a system. In that light, a secret door that vanished into the wall wasn't just practical. It was part of the mystery. Some think it controlled access to sacred chambers. Others say it was a security measure to protect the tomb's contents. Whatever its purpose, it shows how much we still don't fully grasp about ancient Egyptian architecture. It's easy to imagine pyramids as static piles of stone, but they were built by people thinking in systems, mechanics, and long-term durability. Even today, with all our tech, replicating some of their feats, especially without leaving obvious traces, would be tough. The original swiveling door is long gone, likely dismantled during early excavations or looting, but its documented existence adds another quiet marvel to an already astonishing structure. Just picture standing inside centuries ago, pushing against a seamless wall and feeling it swing open effortlessly. Not bad for something built before iron tools existed. Now, here's a fact that flips the usual image of Roman gladiators on its head. Despite their reputation for brutal fights in blood-soaked arenas, most gladiators were actually vegetarians, and they drank a strange tonic made from ashes and vinegar. Not what you'd expect from warriors trained to fight to the death. When we think of gladiators, we imagine them bulking up on meat for strength. But archaeological studies of gladiator cemeteries, like those in Ephesus, modern-day Turkey, tell a different story. Bone analyses show their diet was heavy in barley, beans, and other plant-based foods. They were even nicknamed hordearii, meaning barley men by those who wrote about them. Why? Their plant-based diet wasn't about ethics, but performance. These foods helped build a layer of subcutaneous fat, which sounds odd until you realize it served as protection. In the arena, more fat meant less chance of a deadly wound. Surface cuts looked dramatic, but were less likely to hit vital organs. So a gladiator bleeding on the sand could still survive the fight and put on a show. As for the tonic of ashes and vinegar, it might sound unpleasant, but it was practical. The ashes, probably from burned plants or bones, supplied calcium and minerals. Mixed with vinegar, they created an ancient sports drink to strengthen bones and muscles. Roman authors like Pliny the Elder mentioned this mix, and modern science has confirmed traces of it in gladiator bones. This was no fringe practice. It was a regular part of their training. So much of what we think about the ancient world gets turned upside down when we look closely. Gladiators weren't just wild fighters. They were disciplined athletes with carefully planned diets and recovery routines. No feasting like emperors, but simple meals, hard training, and a peculiar drink to keep their bones strong. It's a perfect example of how small, overlooked details in history can reveal far more than dramatic headlines ever could. Gladiators fought fiercely, but behind the scenes they lived like athletes, bean stew, barley porridge, and all. Now imagine your morning commute, not on streets or sidewalks, but across rooftops. No roads, no alleys, just flat mud brick roofs and wooden ladders connecting houses like an ancient game of hopscotch. This was life in Çatalhöyük, one of the oldest known cities in human history, located in what's now central Turkey. Dating back over 9,000 years, this settlement had no streets at all. Homes were packed tightly together in a honeycomb pattern, with entrances on the roofs instead of the sides. People climbed down ladders through holes in the ceilings to enter their living spaces. At first, that might sound inconvenient, but it actually had clever advantages. Without streets, the settlement was easier to defend. No straightforward paths for invaders to sneak through. The clustered homes helped regulate temperature, keeping interiors warmer in winter and cooler in summer. And hey, if everyone's roof is part of the sidewalk, you've got no excuse not to shovel the snow. Life inside was surprisingly sophisticated. Walls were decorated with murals and animal skulls. Residents buried their dead beneath their floors, likely to keep ancestors close. They farmed, made tools and fabrics, and maintained a social order we're still piecing together today. What's really striking is how egalitarian Çatalhöyük appears to have been. Archaeologists found little evidence of social hierarchy. Homes were roughly equal in size, and grave goods didn't vary much. No palaces, no obvious rulers, just a community, living roof to roof side by side. Some scholars see this as one of the earliest examples of a cooperative urban society. And yet, for all its simplicity, it was a complex and innovative way of life. Here's a polished rewrite of that part, keeping the tone engaging and clear. Despite its uniqueness, Çatalhöyük feels strangely familiar. People cooked meals, raised children, gathered together, and most importantly, figured out a way to make it all work, even without roads. In a way, it's like an ancient version of a close-knit apartment complex, only with fewer elevators and more ladders. Today, the ruins of Çatalhöyük are a UNESCO World Heritage Site, still offering insights into the very roots of city life. From high above, the remains look like a clustered rooftop maze frozen in time. When you think about how humans have been finding creative ways to live together for nearly 10,000 years, maybe your next walk across a crowded street won't seem so complicated after all. Imagine flushing your toilet in 2500 BCE. Sounds ridiculous, right? But if you lived in the Indus Valley civilization, say in Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa, that's basically what you were doing thousands of years before indoor plumbing became a modern staple. This ancient civilization had figured out public sanitation in an advanced way. Well-laid brick drains along streets, private toilets in homes, and soak pits filtering wastewater. The cities were planned so precisely that some archaeologists call them the Manhattans of the Bronze Age. Homes often had their own bathrooms connected to a citywide drainage system. Large public wells provided fresh water, and some buildings even had early showers. Just pour water over yourself with a jug and let it flow down a covered drain. Honestly, parts of the Indus Valley might have been more hygienic than many 19th century European cities, where raw sewage still flowed openly and cholera outbreaks were common. The streets in Mohenjo-Daro were laid out in a grid. Houses had ventilation. Systems and trash was kept outside in designated areas. This wasn't just survival, it was thoughtful urban design. And here's the kicker. We still don't fully understand how they organized it all. The Indus script remains undeciphered. There's no Rosetta Stone to tell us who planned these cities or how they governed them. No big palaces, no flashy tombs, just practical, efficient design that quietly got the job done. It's a reminder that advanced thinking doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it's found in brickwork and water flow. So, for anyone who's ever cursed a blocked sink or a questionable public restroom, take comfort. People have been trying to make modern life more livable for thousands of years, and in some ways they did a remarkable job of it. Think brain surgery is a modern invention? Think again. Ancient Peruvians were performing it over 1,000 years ago, and surprisingly well. The practice, called trepanation, involved removing sections of the skull, often to relieve pressure from head trauma, usually from battle injuries. It sounds brutal, but studies of hundreds of skulls found across the Andes show a survival rate, over 80%. Some individuals even had multiple trepanations, meaning they survived the first and went back for second or third procedures. Imagine the scene. No anesthesia, no sterile surgical suite, just skilled hands, sharp obsidian or bronze. Tools and centuries of knowledge passed down. These weren't random cuts. Evidence shows they used scraping, drilling, and cutting in neat geometric shapes, carefully avoiding brain damage and major blood vessels. Remarkably, signs of healing around the holes prove that patients not only survived, but recovered. How they prevented infection or relieved pain is still a mystery. Maybe herbal poultices, cocoa leaves, or just an incredible tolerance for pain. These ancient Andean surgeons were methodical, experienced, and likely respected, members of their communities. Trepanation wasn't fringe, it was widespread and effective. Compared to 19th century Civil War doctors who had much lower survival rates for similar procedures, ancient Peruvians were ahead of their time. So next time someone says ancient medicine was crude or superstitious, just point to these calm surgeons, carefully removing chunks of skull and sending their patients home to heal. Not bad for a civilization with no MRIs, no antibiotics, and no modern tools, just steady hands, sharp blades, and wisdom passed through generations. Before New York had skyscrapers, before Rome had roads, there was Uruk, a city so old it makes most ancient history seem like yesterday's news. Around 3000 BCE, Uruk was bustling with over 50,000 people, a metropolis by any standard. Picture a crowd that size now, enough to fill a packed stadium. But this crowd didn't have digital screens or popcorn stands. Instead, they had mud brick, temples, ziggurats, and some of the earliest writing systems. Located in modern-day Iraq, Uruk didn't grow by accident. It was a hub of innovation, trade, religion, and power. Often credited as the birthplace of urban life as we know it, Uruk had administrative systems, social structures, and possibly early zoning, thousands of years before the term urban planning existed. People weren't just piling up houses, they were organizing a city. Specialized workers, temples to the goddess Inanna, grain storage, and massive public works all showed a thriving community. And home to one of history's first kings, Gilgamesh, whose legend became one of the world's earliest literary masterpieces. Sure, Uruk lacked plumbing or high-speed internet, But it had something arguably more impressive: writing. Tablets. From Uruk reveal early accounting records, trade lists, and even recipes, because even back then, someone had to keep track of the barley. The city's size and structure show a population not just surviving, but thriving. People came from nearby regions to trade, worship, and probably complain about crowds, just like today. If you ever feel overwhelmed by modern life, remember ancient Mesopotamians dealt with traffic jams of carts and goats long before most of us even figured out farming. Ever think your last medical bill was steep? Try practicing medicine under the Code of Hammurabi. Around 1750 BCE, in ancient Babylon, laws didn't just cover theft or property. They laid out exactly what doctors could charge and, crucially, what happened if their treatments went wrong. Hammurabi's Code is one of the oldest known law sets, carved into stone for all to see, holding doctors accountable and protecting patients in a way that still resonates today.